In the far reaches of space, humanity has expanded to colonize distant planets, setting up thriving cities on planets once thought to be barren. Yet, despite all their achievements, a series of catastrophic military mistakes from Earth has inadvertently triggered a long-forgotten force. Commander Eleanor Voss, a high-ranking officer in the United Earth Fleet, sits in the command center of a newly established colony on Ares 7, a temperate world once thought to be uninhabitable. With tensions rising between the Earth Council and the independent colonies, a fleet of warships is sent to ensure compliance with a new mandate that would strip away their autonomy. Voss, though loyal to the mission, can feel something's wrong. She's uneasy about the silent, ancient power rumored to exist in the unexplored caves beneath the planet's surface. When a disastrous bombing campaign goes wrong, destroying not just rebel strongholds but deep below the surface as well, Voss's worst fears are realized. The ancient threat, a race of creatures believed to be legends, is very real. The bombs didn't just hit military targets, they awakened something far older than humanity itself. As the first of the dragons emerges from the planet's crust, Voss and her crew watch in horror from their high-tech command stations. These dragons are nothing like the mythic creatures of old Earth stories. They are vast, armored, and their fiery breath makes even the most advanced weapons seem like toys. With each dragon that rises, the planet's atmosphere shifts. The ground shakes beneath the colonies, causing massive earthquakes. Colonies that had once stood proudly as symbols of humanity's dominance now face annihilation. The planet's defense systems are nearly useless against the ancient creatures, which seem to be drawn to the energy emanating from the newly formed colonies. In a desperate bid to save what's left of Ares 7, Commander Voss leads a team of scientists and soldiers deep into the caverns where they believe the dragons originated. Along the way, they uncover ruins, technology, and artifacts from an ancient civilization that once thrived on the planet before it was wiped out by the very dragons they've now awoken. By tracing long-lost soul summonings, the extras learn that far more people suffer from forlorn hope too. Meanwhile, the political leaders on Earth scramble to contain the chaos, sending more fleets, but each time they arrive, they are met with destruction. It becomes clear that humanity has not only awakened the dragons, but has also triggered an ancient conflict between powerful cosmic forces they barely understand. The full scale of the dragon awakening becomes apparent as more and more creatures rise from the depths, each more fearsome than the last. Earth's fleet, which was initially focused on quelling rebellion, now finds itself fighting for survival against an enemy that cannot be reasoned with or defeated using conventional tactics. Commander Voss, trapped in a colony now under siege, has to make a choice: continue the fight or try to form an alliance with the very creatures that threaten to destroy humanity. But with no communication from Earth and no other apparent allies in the galaxy, time is running out. The dragons seem to be driven by a deep-seated ancient rage, and humanity's weapons are simply not enough. So, as Voss grapples with her decisions, she uncovers a chilling truth in the old ruins. These dragons were not just a threat to humanity, they were a warning to the other intelligent species in the galaxy. The bombing of Ares 7 didn't just wake the dragons, it was a signal to all of the universe's most dangerous creatures. And now, humanity is caught in the crossfire. Voss must make a difficult decision: continue to fight, or risk everything to forge a new path forward, one that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. What do you think so far? Would you like me to continue building the story out from here? The long metal corridors of the USS Conquest hummed with quiet energy. The ship was a fortress, a symbol of Earth's might, floating silently above the planet Ares 7, a colony that had been founded years ago and was now teetering on the brink of rebellion. Commander Eleanor Voss stood at the bridge's window, staring out at the planet's surface. Ares 7 was a temperate world, covered in dense forests, vast mountain ranges, and oceans shimmering under a hazy pink sky. It was a place where life had begun to flourish, but only under the careful management of Earth's resources. The colony had grown restless, though. Whispers of independence had turned into open calls for rebellion. The Earth Council, too far away to maintain direct oversight, had issued an order for military intervention. A fleet of warships, including the Conquest, had been dispatched to bring the colonists back into the fold. "Commander Voss," a voice broke through her thoughts. Lieutenant Malcolm Graves, her second-in-command, stood at attention by the console. "The fleet is in position. We're ready to begin the mission. The Council's orders are clear. We proceed with Phase 1. Voss turned slowly, her gaze settling on the young officer. Graves had joined the fleet with the same sense of duty and optimism that Voss herself had once possessed. She could see it in his eyes, a belief that Earth was in the right, that order was paramount, and that sometimes a show of force was necessary to maintain that order. "I know, Lieutenant," she said, her voice low but firm. "But there's something about this mission that doesn't sit right with me." Graves raised an eyebrow. "You're worried about the rebellion, sir? The Council is certain that it's not widespread. The colony's been destabilized by a few rogue elements." Voss nodded but didn't respond immediately. Her mind wandered back to the reports she'd read in the last few weeks. Reports about strange seismic activity on Ares 7, unusual electromagnetic disturbances, and the eerie silence that had settled over the world. The scientists on the ground had chalked it up to minor geological shifts, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. "Send the signal to begin bombardment," she ordered, her voice taking on a colder tone. She had been given no choice. The rebellion needed to be crushed, and Earth's authority needed to be reasserted. Still, a knot formed in her stomach as she issued the order. Graves hesitated for a moment before turning back to the console. "Aye, Commander. Beginning bombardment sequence now." The room fell silent as the first wave of artillery struck the surface of Ares 7, sending plumes of smoke and dust rising into the atmosphere. Voss felt her heartbeat quicken as she watched the explosions rip across the lush landscape. The mission had begun. Hours later, Voss sat in her quarters going over mission reports. The bombardment had gone largely as expected. Rebel encampments destroyed, military infrastructure crippled, but something in the data was bothering her. The seismic activity had spiked again, but this time it was different. The tremors were deeper, more intense. They seemed almost deliberate. A sharp knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, pushing herself up from the desk. Graves entered, his face pale. He looked shaken. "What's wrong?" Voss asked, her voice softening at the sight of his unease. "I don't know how to explain this, Commander, but—" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "The seismic readings, they're increasing. And the electromagnetic interference we've been picking up, it's not random anymore. It's organized." Voss stood up, her mind racing. "What do you mean, organized? You think the rebels are doing this?" Graves shook his head. "No, I don't think so. These readings are coming from deep within the planet, far deeper than any human-made structure could reach." "Are you saying the tremors aren't natural?" Graves swallowed hard. "It's possible, but that's not the worst part. There's something else, something underground, something big." Voss frowned. How big? Commander, I don't think it's a structure at all. I think it's a creature. Voss stood in the operations center, looking at the holographic map projected before her. The surface of Ares 7 was now riddled with craters and scorched landscapes where the bombardment had been most intense. But below the surface, there was something else. I want every available sensor focused on these coordinates, Voss said, pointing to a location deep within the planet's largest mountain range, where the most violent seismic disturbances had originated. Whatever's down there, it's not just a natural phenomenon. The map shifted, zooming in on the region, showing intricate networks of caves, vast underground chambers, almost as if there was a massive structure beneath the mountains. Lieutenant Graves stepped forward, his face set in grim determination. Commander, I think we need to investigate this directly. We can't afford to ignore it. If there's a threat down there... We'll investigate, Voss interrupted. But we need to be cautious. This mission wasn't supposed to be about finding ancient monsters. It was supposed to be about restoring control. Graves turned away, looking out at the planet's surface. What if the creatures weren't always monsters, Commander? What if they were something else entirely? Something we've forgotten? Voss's mind flashed back to the old legends from her childhood. Stories of dragons, of colossal beasts from the age of myth that had ruled the earth before humanity had taken its place at the top of the food chain. She had always thought those stories were just that, stories. But now, standing on the edge of this unknown world, she couldn't shake the feeling that there might be more to those myths than she had ever realized. By the time they had a small team ready to descend into the caverns, the tremors were growing stronger. Voss's stomach churned as she geared up for the mission. The colonists on Ares 7 had heard the explosions, seen the lights in the sky, and feared that Earth was about to wipe them out. The crew had their orders, but Voss couldn't help but feel that there was something more at stake here than just rebellion. A team of scientists and soldiers accompanied her as they descended into the caves beneath the surface. They rode in a small transport shuttle, the walls vibrating with each aftershock. The deeper they traveled, the more the air seemed to change, charged with an energy that was unnatural, almost electric. The shuttle finally came to a halt in a vast chamber, so large that it seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were covered in strange, luminous markings, like glyphs or ancient symbols. The air felt thick with something ancient, something alive. Commander, look at this, one of the scientists, Dr. Maeve Lee, said, pointing toward the far end of the cavern. This isn't natural. The team moved forward, their boots crunching on the rocky ground. As they neared the walls, Voss could make out faint outlines. Huge, elongated shapes pressed against the rock, as though they had been buried alive. The symbols surrounding them seemed to pulse with light, almost as if they were responding to the presence of the team. Voss's heart raced as she realized the terrifying truth. They're not just creatures, she whispered. They're ancient. This planet wasn't always human territory. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Before they could react, the ground shook violently. A low, rumbling sound reverberated through the chamber. The symbols on the walls flared bright, and with a deafening crack, something deep within the cavern stirred. Something vast. Something ancient. The rumble of the cavern beneath them shook the very foundation of the shuttle, and Commander Eleanor Voss instinctively gripped the seat in front of her. The deep, echoing growl that reverberated through the walls was unlike anything she had ever heard before. Primitive, guttural, like the sound of an ancient creature stirring from an endless slumber. The scientist, Dr. Maeve Lee, was the first to react. Her eyes went wide, her hands trembling as she gripped her datapad. "Commander, We need to get out of here. Something's happening. Something's waking up." Voss remained silent for a moment, her mind racing as the air in the cavern seemed to shift. The electric charge she had felt earlier intensified, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The chamber was alive with energy, the strange symbols glowing brighter as the rumbling increased. "Stay calm, everyone," Voss ordered, her voice sharp. "This is a seismic anomaly. We don't know what we're dealing with down here, but we need to keep our wits about us." "Dr. Lee, what's going on with the markings?" Lee looked back at the strange, pulsing glyphs that adorned the cavern walls. They seemed to throb in time with the rumbling, as though they were sentient. "I've never seen anything like this," she said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "These symbols, they're not just decorative. They're part of a network, a language, or some kind of technology. This isn't natural." Voss narrowed her eyes. "Technology? You mean to tell me these things have been here all along?" Lee nodded, stepping cautiously toward the wall. She ran a gloved hand over one of the glowing glyphs, and the cavern seemed to react to her touch. The lights flickered, and the ground trembled again, more violently this time. "This isn't just a natural formation," Lee continued, speaking faster now. "These creatures, or whatever they are, were buried here. But why? Why would they be sealed away in the first place?" Voss had no answers, only a growing sense of dread. The air was heavy now, almost oppressive, as though the cavern itself was holding its breath. The crew was on edge, their weapons trained on every dark corner. But the more they looked around, the more they realized that the chamber wasn't empty. It wasn't just the markings and the strange symbols. There were shapes, enormous shapes embedded into the rock, massive outlines that resembled bones. "Commander!" Graves' voice crackled over the radio, breaking through Voss's thoughts. "We've found something huge. You need to see this." The team moved quickly, navigating the cavern's winding passages toward the source of Graves' message. The further they went, the colder the air grew. Voss pulled her jacket tighter, her breath visible in the dim light of their helmets. As they rounded a corner, the sight that greeted them left even the seasoned soldiers frozen in place. The chamber ahead was massive, far larger than anything they had anticipated. In the center, lying in a vast, ancient depression in the ground, was a massive skeletal structure. It was like something from a nightmare, with long, curving bones that seemed to stretch for miles, each one the size of a skyscraper. The bones were slick, dark, and almost obsidian-like in their texture, as though they had been preserved in some unnatural way. "Is this real?" Dr. Lee's voice trembled as she approached the structure. "I've read ancient texts, but nothing even comes close to this." Voss stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the massive bones. There was something unnerving about them, something familiar yet foreign, like an instinctual memory buried deep in her mind, clawing its way to the surface. Her pulse quickened as she looked at the strange, jagged markings that ran along the bone's surface. "What are these?" Voss muttered, reaching out and tracing her fingers along one of the markings. The surface was smooth, cold, and unyielding, but the moment her fingers made contact, the ground trembled again, and the bones seemed to respond, shifting ever so slightly. "That wasn't us," Graves said, his voice sharp. "That was—" Before Voss could respond, the air grew thick with the hum of energy. The symbols on the cavern walls flared once more, brighter than before, casting an eerie glow across the skeletal remains. And then, with a sudden explosive crack, the largest of the bones shifted. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, sending rocks tumbling from the ceiling. The team scrambled to maintain their footing, but the noise was deafening. It wasn't just the rumbling now. It was a roar, low and guttural, like something ancient and primal had been awoken from a deep slumber. "Get back!" Voss shouted, pulling her team away from the bone structure. The rumbling reached a fever pitch as the air began to crackle with energy. There was something alive down here, something old, something powerful. And then it happened. The bones began to shift again, this time with purpose. The gigantic skeleton that had lain dormant for eons seemed to come to life. Voss watched in horror as the massive ribcage expanded, the bones creaking and groaning as if they had been stretched after millennia of stillness. The creature, if it could still be called that, was awakening, its form rising from the ground like some primordial titan. The glow of the markings intensified, the air now thick with an electric charge. The creature's head, a massive skull with hollow eye sockets, seemed to turn toward them, its gaze empty but somehow filled with a terrible awareness. "We need to leave, now!" Voss screamed, her voice filled with panic. The creature's head shifted again, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. It was too late. From the skeletal remains, something more than just bones began to emerge, something alive. Tendrils of what looked like muscle and sinew began to grow from the skeleton, wrapping themselves around the bones like vines. Then came the eyes. Two massive orbs, black as night, appeared in the skull. They glowed with a faint fiery light, like the embers of a long-dead fire. Before anyone could react, a deep, thunderous roar erupted from the creature, shaking the very foundation of the cavern. The noise was so loud it felt like it was coming from within their skulls. The bones were no longer bones. They were armor, a living, breathing creature that had somehow been frozen in time, only to be reawakened by their presence. "We've made a terrible mistake," Dr. Lee whispered, her voice trembling. Voss could only nod. The fear that had been building in her gut for days now exploded into full-blown panic. This was no mere rebellion they were facing, it was something far worse. The dragons of legend, the creatures that had once ruled Earth's ancient past, had not just been stories, they had been real, and now they were waking. "Pull back," Voss commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Get to the shuttle, now!" The team scrambled, retreating through the narrow tunnels as the massive creature's roar echoed through the cavern. Voss could feel the walls closing in, the weight of history, and something far darker bearing down on them. The shuttle was just a few hundred meters away when the ground shook again, knocking them off their feet. From the depths of the cavern came a sound, horrible and bone-chilling, a screech that seemed to come from every corner, from every crevice. The creature was coming. Voss didn't have time to think. She had to survive, to escape, to report back to Earth. But the realization struck her like a fist to the chest. Whatever had been buried here, whatever they had just unearthed, was no longer bound by the confines of its ancient prison. It was free. This chapter expands on the team's exploration of Ares 7, their terrifying discovery, and the catastrophic awakening of an ancient force. The tension builds as they realize the enormity of what they've unleashed, leading to their desperate escape. How would you like to continue from here? Should we focus on their retreat, or dive deeper into the consequences of awakening the creatures? Let me know. The screech that echoed from the cavern walls was deafening, a sound that seemed to rattle the very bones of the planet. Commander Eleanor Voss could feel the vibrations beneath her feet, each shockwave reverberating through the narrow passageways as they scrambled toward the shuttle. The creature, the thing that had once been a vast skeleton, was no longer just an ancient relic. It was alive, and it was angry. Voss barked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the creature. She could see the fear in the eyes of her team, but there was no time for hesitation. The sound of the creature's massive body shifting, its talons scraping against the stone, filled the air. It was awake now, fully aware of their presence, and it wasn't about to let them leave unscathed. Lieutenant Graves, his face pale with fear, pushed through the narrow tunnel, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands. "Commander, we need to hurry. It's coming for us." Voss's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't slow down. They had to reach the shuttle, had to escape before the creature emerged in full force. Her mind raced as she tried to process everything they had just uncovered. The creature, no, the dragons of legend, had been locked away beneath the surface for eons, its power sealed away by some unknown force. And now, with the bombardment, they had awakened it, or perhaps triggered it. "Keep moving! We need to get out of this cave system!" Voss shouted, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The tunnels were narrowing, and the air was thick with the stench of sulfur and ancient decay. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the cave itself were alive, responding to the creature's awakening. The rest of the team was struggling to keep up, their boots slipping on the slick stone floor as the tremors grew stronger. Voss glanced over her shoulder, seeing the faint glow of the creature's massive form just behind them. It was enormous, its skeletal frame now covered in tendrils of sinew and muscle, its rib cage expanding and contracting with each monstrous breath. The creature's eyes, massive, hollow orbs, were fixed on them, glowing with an eerie, fiery light. "It's hunting us," Dr. Maeve Lee said, her voice cracking with fear as she stumbled to catch up. "We need to get to the surface." Voss didn't need to be told twice. They were only a few hundred meters from the shuttle, but the path ahead was a labyrinth of sharp turns and dead ends. The creature's roars were deafening now, and the very ground beneath their feet felt like it was shaking apart. As they reached another bend in the tunnel, Voss stopped dead in her tracks. The passage ahead was blocked. An enormous rockfall had blocked their path, piles of rubble blocking any hope of escape. "Shit!" Graves cursed, trying to push through the debris with his shoulder. "We're trapped." Voss quickly assessed the situation, her mind working in overdrive. They couldn't afford to waste time. The creature was closing in, and every second they spent here put them closer to becoming its next meal. "Dr. Lee," Voss called, turning toward the scientist. "Any ideas?" Lee looked at the debris, then at the walls of the tunnel. "There's another passage," she said breathlessly. "It's narrow, but it leads to a lower level of the caves. If we take that route, we can bypass this blockage and get to the shuttle faster." Voss didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." The team moved quickly, retracing their steps down another tunnel, following Lee's directions. The narrow passage seemed to close in on them as they descended, the air growing colder and thicker with each step. Voss glanced over her shoulder, hearing the distant crash of the creature's massive form breaking through the cavern behind them. They couldn't afford to be slow now. Every step was critical. As they rounded another corner, they saw it, the shuttle, hovering just a few meters away. Its engines hummed faintly and the door was open, waiting for them. Voss exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They were almost out. But before they could reach the shuttle, the ground shook again, this time with such force that it sent them tumbling to the ground. The shuttle rocked violently, its engines sputtering as the shock wave hit. Voss scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding as the creature's roars grew louder, closer. She could hear it, feel it, in the very bones of the planet. "Get in, now!" she shouted. The team didn't need any further encouragement. They rushed into the shuttle, barely managing to get inside before the creature's massive form emerged from the cavern's entrance, its eyes glowing like twin infernos. Voss slammed the door shut just as the creature's massive claws scraped across the shuttle's hull, leaving deep gouges in the metal. "Go, go, go!" Voss screamed at the pilot. The shuttle lurched into the air, its engines roaring to life as it shot upward, away from the surface of Ares 7-7. As they soared higher into the atmosphere, Voss glanced out the shuttle's viewport. Below them, the creature, no longer just a skeleton but a living, breathing titan, stood on the ground, its immense form casting a long shadow over the landscape. Its glowing eyes were fixed on them, a primal hunger burning in them. But they were out of its reach for now.